Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It reveals who you've been all along. The rain came down in thin, steady lines, turning the streetlights into blurred halos of gold, and Ethan Caldwell stood across the street, watching the diner like it was a test he hadn't quite decided to take yet. His coat was worn, deliberately chosen, the fabric just thin enough to let the cold seep through. His shoes scuffed, his watch, usually worth more than a month's rent, left behind in a locked drawer because tonight he wasn't a millionaire, not the man whose name opened doors and silenced rooms, but just another stranger with nothing to offer but presence. And he had rehearsed this version of himself carefully, stripping away every signal of wealth until all that remained was a man most people would overlook, because that was the point, to see what remained when everything impressive was gone. 3 restaurants had already turned him away, polite smiles tightening into quiet refusals, a glance at his clothes, a pause too long, a door not quite opening, and each time, Ethan had nodded, as if confirming something he already believed, that people measured worth in seconds, that kindness came with conditions, that love, if it existed at all, came with a price tag. But this place was different, smaller, quieter, a narrow diner with warm lights spilling onto the wet pavement, a hand-painted sign flickering slightly above the door. And inside, he could see her moving between tables, steady, unhurried, as if the noise of the world never quite reached her. Clara. Whitmore didn't notice him at first, or maybe she did and chose not to show it. Her movements precise, almost rhythmic, the kind of quiet efficiency that didn't ask for attention but held it anyway. Her hair pulled back simply, her expression calm, not cold, not warm, just present, like she was exactly where she needed to be. Ethan stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly, and for a moment, no one looked up, not the couple by the window, not the man reading a newspaper in the corner, not even Clara, who continued pouring coffee as if the world had already decided what he was worth and moved on. He waited, hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of the silence, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar, because in his real life, silence meant anticipation, meant people waiting for him, watching him, adjusting themselves to his presence. But here, he was just another man standing by the door. Then Clara turned, finally noticing him, and there was no flicker of judgment in her eyes, no quick scan of his clothes, no hesitation, just a simple, steady look like she saw him and nothing more, nothing less. "You're soaked," she said, her voice quiet, even as if stating a fact rather than offering concern, and Ethan almost smiled, because it wasn't what he expected, not a greeting, not a question, just an observation that felt strangely human. "It's raining," he replied, testing her tone, waiting for the shift, the subtle change that usually came when people realized what someone could, or couldn't, give them, but it didn't come. "Not yet." She nodded once, as if that explained everything, and reached behind the counter, pulling out a clean towel, placing it on the edge without ceremony. "Sit wherever you like," she said, already turning back to her work, not watching to see if he would follow, not trying to impress, not trying to push him away, just continuing, as if his presence didn't disrupt the rhythm of her world at all. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, something unfamiliar pressing against the edges of his thoughts, because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. There was no test, yet no clear reaction to measure, no immediate proof of his theory, just a quiet moment that didn't fit into the categories he had built so carefully. And as he walked toward the window seat, rain still dripping from his coat, he realized, for the first time that night, that he might not be the one in control of what happened next. Clara did not come to his table right away, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. She moved through the diner with the same quiet rhythm, refilling coffee, clearing plates, exchanging brief words with customers who seemed to know her without needing to say much, and Ethan sat there, the towel untouched beside his hand, watching as minutes passed without urgency, without the subtle rush he was used to, because in his world, time bent around him, people adjusted, conversations paused, but here, the clock ticked evenly, indifferent. He leaned back slightly, letting the damp fabric of his coat press against the booth, testing the discomfort, reminding himself why he was here, because this was not about comfort, not about being served, but about seeing what remained when he offered nothing in return. When Clara finally approached, she did not carry a menu like a shield or a script, just a small notepad and that same steady presence. Her eyes meeting his for a brief second before she spoke. "What can I get you tonight?" And there was no assumption in her tone, no hint that she expected anything more than a simple answer. Ethan hesitated, not because he did not know what to order, but because he was deciding how far to push it, how to shape the test. And then he said, "Just water," his voice flat, almost dismissive, watching closely for the reaction, the flicker of annoyance or judgment that usually followed such a minimal request. But Clara only nodded once, as if water was as valid as any other choice, and wrote it down without comment. She returned a moment later with a glass, placing it carefully in front of him, not rushing, not lingering. And as she turned to leave, Ethan spoke again, sharper this time. "Is that it?" The words hanging in the air, edged with something intentional, something designed to provoke. And for the first time, Clara paused, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge the question, her hand resting lightly against the back of the booth. "Was there something missing?" she asked, her voice still even, but now there was a slight shift, not defensive, not offended, just attentive, like she was giving him the space to explain himself without assuming the worst. Ethan studied her, searching for cracks, for signs of irritation. But there was nothing obvious, no tightening of her jaw, no forced smile, just that same calm surface that refused to give him what he expected. "No," he said after a second, leaning back again. "I guess not." And Clara nodded once more, as if closing a small, unimportant loop before moving on to her next table without another word. Ethan watched her go, a faint crease forming between his brows, because this was not how people usually responded, not to him, not even to this version of him. And he found himself tapping his fingers lightly against the table, a habit he rarely allowed to surface, a sign of something slipping out of place. Across the room, a man in a tailored coat approached the counter, his presence louder, more noticeable, the kind of man Ethan recognized instantly. Someone used to being seen, and Clara greeted him the same way she had greeted Ethan, the same tone, the same measured pace, no shift in energy, no extra warmth, no calculated charm, just consistency. And Ethan felt something subtle shift in his chest, not quite discomfort, not quite curiosity, something in between. He took a sip of the water, the glass cool against his fingers, and realized that for the first time that night, he was not observing a reaction, he was waiting for one. And that difference, small as it seemed, unsettled him more than any rejection had. The rain outside softened into a quiet drizzle, the kind that blurred the world without fully hiding it. And inside the diner, the hum of conversation settled into a steady rhythm that Ethan could not quite tune out or control. He sat with the same glass of water, now half empty, his fingers resting against the edge as if grounding himself in something simple, something that did not shift or respond to his presence. And across the room, Clara continued moving through her shift with that same unbroken calm, as if every table mattered the same amount, as if no one customer could tilt the balance of her attention. A family near the window laughed softly over shared dessert. An older man folded his newspaper with deliberate care, and the man in the tailored coat spoke in low, confident tones, expecting to be heard, expecting to be prioritized, but Clara responded to each of them with the same measured pace, never rushing toward importance, never slowing for insignificance, just moving, steady and precise. Ethan watched it all, not with the detached curiosity he had walked in with, but with something sharper now, something closer to confusion, because the pattern he relied on, the predictable exchange of value and attention, was not appearing, and that absence felt louder than any rejection. He shifted in his seat, the dampness of his coat no longer something he noticed, and when Clara passed by his table again, he spoke without fully planning it. "You are not very busy tonight," his tone casual, but edged, like he was offering her an opening to react, to justify, to reveal. Something beneath that calm surface. She stopped, just for a second, her eyes meeting his again, and there was no defensiveness there. No need to explain, just a quiet acknowledgement of the statement itself. "Busy enough," she said, her voice unchanged, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Everyone gets their time." And the words lingered in the space between them longer than expected, simple, but not empty. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze narrowing, because that answer did not fit into the categories he had built. It was not compliance, not resistance, not even indifference. It was something else, something that did not revolve around him at all, and that, more than anything, felt unfamiliar. "Even someone who only orders water?" he asked, the question sharper now, less controlled. And for the first time, Clara did not respond immediately, not because she was searching for an answer, but because she seemed to be considering whether the question itself mattered. Her eyes steady, not challenging, not soft, just present. "Water is still something," she said finally, and there was no emphasis, no hidden meaning layered in her tone, just a quiet statement that refused to diminish or elevate. And then she moved on again, leaving Ethan with the echo of words that should have felt insignificant, but did not. He sat back slowly, his hand tightening slightly around the glass, not in anger, not even in frustration, but in something closer to realization, a subtle shift that he could not yet name. Because for the first time since he had started this experiment, he was not measuring her reaction against his expectations. He was measuring his expectations against her. Reality, and the two did not align. Across the diner, the man in the tailored coat laughed, a louder sound that briefly pulled attention toward him, but Clara did not turn faster, did not prioritize the noise. She continued at her pace, finishing what she had already started before moving on, and Ethan noticed it, that quiet refusal to be redirected by status or volume, and something in his chest tightened, not painfully, but noticeably, like a truth pressing gently against the edges of something he had always assumed was solid. He looked down at the table, at the simple glass, the faint ring of water forming beneath it, and for the first time that night, the question forming in his mind was not about her at all, but about himself, and that question, unspoken, unsettled him more than any answer could have. The diner clock ticked past another quiet minute, its steady rhythm almost too precise, and Ethan found himself listening to it more than the conversations around him, as if the sound could anchor something that was beginning to slip. He had come here with a plan, a structure, a clear set of expectations about how this would unfold. But now those expectations felt thinner, less certain, like something built on assumptions he had never thought to question. Clara moved past his table again, carrying 2 plates this time, her posture unchanged, her focus complete. And when she set the dishes down in front of another customer, she did not linger for praise or acknowledgement. She simply nodded once and stepped away, already transitioning to the next task without hesitation. Ethan watched closely, his eyes narrowing slightly, because there was no performance in what she did, no subtle shift to impress, no calculated warmth reserved for those who could offer something in return, just a consistency that felt almost deliberate, as if she had decided long ago how she would treat people and saw no reason to adjust it based on circumstance. He leaned forward again, the edge of the table pressing lightly against his arms. And when Clara approached once more, he spoke before she could pass. "Why do you do that?" His voice quieter now, less edged, but still searching, still probing. She paused, turning slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. "Do what?" she asked. And the question was not defensive, not dismissive, just direct, as if she genuinely wanted to understand what he meant. Ethan gestured faintly toward the room, toward the other customers, toward the entire space that seemed to operate without the rules he expected. "Treat everyone the same," he said, the words coming out slower than he intended, because as he said them, he realized how unusual that sounded to him. Clara considered him for a brief moment, her gaze steady, and then she answered, "Because they are," and there was no emphasis, no attempt to turn it into something profound, just a simple statement that seemed to exist without needing validation. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time, not sharp, not sudden, but persistent like a quiet pressure building beneath the surface. Because the answer was too simple, too direct, and yet it disrupted something he had always taken for granted. "That is not how the world works," he said, almost automatically, the words slipping out with the confidence of someone who had built his life on that belief. And for the first time, Clara's expression changed, not dramatically, just a slight softening around her eyes, as if she recognized the statement not as a challenge, but as something familiar. "Maybe not," she replied, her voice still calm. "But that does not mean it cannot." And then she turned away again, leaving Ethan with the weight of a possibility he had never considered seriously, because in his world, things were measured, calculated, exchanged, every interaction tied to value, every outcome influenced by what someone brought to the table. But here in this small diner, that system did not seem to apply, at least not in the way he understood it. He sat back slowly, his hand resting flat against the table now, no longer gripping the glass, no longer testing the edges of the moment, just feeling it. And across the room, the man in the tailored coat stood to leave, placing a generous tip on the counter with a confident gesture, the kind that usually drew attention, appreciation, a shift in tone. But Clara only nodded once as she cleared the space, her reaction no different than it had been for anyone else. And Ethan really noticed, that nothing about her changed in response to the money. Not her posture, not her expression, not her pace, and that absence of reaction felt louder than any gratitude could have been. He looked down again, at his own empty glass, at the simple table in front of him, and for the first time, the test he had designed no longer felt like a controlled experiment. It felt incomplete because it assumed something about people that this moment, this place, this woman was quietly refusing to confirm. And as the realization settled in, subtle but undeniable, Ethan understood that whatever he was about to learn here, it would not be something he could measure or predict or control. The door opened again with a soft chime, letting in a brief gust of cool air that carried the fading scent of rain, and Ethan glanced up out of habit, expecting nothing, yet noticing everything, the way a young man stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket, looking around with the slight hesitation of someone unsure if he belonged. Clara noticed him too, but she did not rush, did not shift her pace. She simply finished placing a receipt on the counter before turning, her attention moving. Naturally, not pulled, not forced, just redirected when the moment allowed. Ethan watched closely, his gaze sharper now, not searching for flaws but for patterns, and as the man approached, speaking quietly, almost apologetically, Clara listened the same way she had listened to everyone else, her posture steady, her tone unchanged, offering a seat, a menu, the same simple acknowledgement that had unsettled Ethan since he walked in. There was no difference, not in her expression, not in her timing, not in the space she gave him, and Ethan felt it again, that subtle pressure, the quiet unraveling of something he had always believed was fixed. He shifted forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, no longer pretending disinterest, no longer playing the role as carefully as before, because the role itself was beginning to feel less important than what he was. Observing. When Clara passed his table again, he spoke, not sharply this time, not as a test, but almost as a question he had not planned. "Do you ever get tired of it?" And the words lingered between them, softer, less controlled, carrying something closer to curiosity than challenge. Clara stopped, turning toward him with that same measured stillness, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. And for a brief moment, she did not answer, not because she could not, but because she seemed to be, deciding how much the question mattered. "Of what?" she asked, her voice quiet, and Ethan exhaled slightly, realizing he had not fully formed the thought himself. "Of people," he said after a second, the word vague, but heavy with everything he had experienced, everything he had assumed. Clara considered him, her expression unchanged, but there was a slight shift now, something more attentive, more present, as if she recognized the difference in his tone, the absence of the edge that had been there before. "People are not one thing," she replied, her voice even, but not distant. "So there is nothing to get tired of in the same way. And the answer did not come with emphasis or explanation, just a quiet clarity that settled into the space between them. Ethan leaned back slowly, his hand brushing against the glass, now nearly empty, and he felt it, unmistakably this time. The difference between what he had expected to find and what was actually unfolding, because he had come here to confirm something, to prove that people responded to value, to status, to what someone could offer, but Clara was not responding to any of those things, not because she was resisting them, but because she did not seem to be measuring them at all. Across the diner, the young man she had just seated smiled faintly as she brought him a cup of coffee, his shoulders relaxing slightly, and Ethan noticed the small shift, the way a simple gesture, given without calculation, changed the atmosphere around him. And for the first time, Ethan was not analyzing as a transaction. He was noticing it as something else entirely. He looked down at the table again, at the faint water ring that had spread slightly wider, and realized that the test he had designed was no longer intact. Not because it had failed, but because it was built on a question that no longer felt complete. And as that thought settled in, quiet but persistent, Ethan understood that whatever he had come here to discover, it was already beginning to change him in ways he had not planned. And that realization, subtle as it was, felt more unsettling than any answer he had expected to find. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving only the faint sound of water dripping from the edge of the awning outside, a slow and steady rhythm that filled the quiet spaces between conversations, and Ethan found himself listening to it again, not because it mattered, but because it did not demand anything from him, the same way this place did not demand anything from him. And that absence of expectation felt unfamiliar, almost disorienting. He glanced around the diner, noticing how the room had subtly shifted, a few tables now empty, others filled with new faces, yet Clara moved through it all with the same consistency, as if time passing did not change the way she approached any single moment. She paused near the counter, speaking softly with the cook, then turned, carrying a plate toward a table where an elderly woman sat alone, her hands folded neatly, her posture quiet. And when Clara placed the plate in front of her, she did not rush away. She lingered just long enough to say something that made the woman smile. Not a large smile, not exaggerated, just a small, genuine one, the kind that seemed to come from being seen rather than served. Ethan watched that moment closely, something tightening slightly in his chest because it was not dramatic, not remarkable in any obvious way, but it held a kind of weight he could not easily dismiss, and he realized, almost reluctantly, that he had not seen that kind of interaction in a long time, not in his world where everything was efficient, structured, optimized, where time was money and attention was a resource to be allocated carefully. Clara returned to the counter, her pace unchanged, and Ethan spoke again before he could stop himself. "You remember things about people." His voice quieter now, less guarded, more observant, and Clara turned toward him, her expression steady. "Sometimes," she replied, and there was no pride in the answer, no sense of achievement, just a simple acknowledgement. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting loosely against the table. No longer gripping, no longer testing, just present. "Why?" he asked, the question softer than any he had asked before. And this time, Clara did not answer immediately, her gaze holding his for a moment longer than usual, as if she was considering not just the question, but the person asking it. "Because it matters to them," she said finally, her voice calm, but carrying a quiet certainty that did not need explanation, and the words settled into Ethan's thoughts in a way that felt unfamiliar, because they were not transactional, not strategic, not tied to any measurable outcome. They simply existed as a reason on their own. Ethan sat back slowly, his eyes drifting briefly to the window, where the last drops of rain clung to the glass, catching the light in small, uneven patterns, and for a moment he felt something shift again, deeper this time, something that did not come with clarity or resolution, but with a quiet recognition that the framework he had built, the one that had guided his decisions, his relationships, his entire understanding of people, might not be as complete as he had believed. Across the room, the young man Clara had seated earlier laughed softly at. Something on his phone, the sound light, unguarded, and Ethan noticed how the atmosphere around him felt different now. Not because of anything grand or dramatic, but because of a series of small, consistent actions that had nothing to do with status or expectation and everything to do with presence. He looked down at his empty glass, then back up at Clara as she moved toward another table. And for the first time that night, the thought crossed his mind, not as a strategy, not as part of the test, but as something else entirely, something quieter, more uncertain, that perhaps what he had been searching for was not something he could uncover by pretending to be less, but something he had failed to see while being more. And that realization, subtle as it was, lingered with him, steady and unresolved, as the night continued around him. The diner had grown quieter, not empty, but softer, as if the night itself was settling in, and Ethan remained at his table longer than he had intended, longer than any version of this test had ever required, his empty glass still sitting in front of him like something unfinished. He watched Clara again, but this time not as an observer trying to decode her, not as someone measuring outcomes, but as someone trying to understand something that did not follow his rules, and the difference was subtle, but it changed everything. She moved past him once more, and this time, she stopped without him needing to speak, her presence calm, steady, as if she had already noticed the shift in him before he fully understood it himself. "Do you need anything else?" she asked, her voice the same as before, unchanged by the passing hours, and Ethan hesitated, not because he did not have an answer, but because the answer he had planned no longer felt relevant. He glanced down at the table, then back at her, and for a brief moment, the version of himself he had constructed for this night felt thin, almost unnecessary, like a layer he no longer needed to hold on to. "I should probably get something," he said, his tone quieter now, more grounded, and Clara gave a small nod, not surprised, not expectant, just acknowledging the moment as it was. "What would you like?" she asked, and Ethan exhaled slightly, realizing that for the first time that night, he was not choosing based on the test, not trying to provoke a reaction, just answering the question. "Coffee," he said, simple, unguarded, and Clara wrote it down without comment before turning toward the counter. As she moved away, Ethan leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the window again, where the last traces of rain had faded, leaving the glass clear, reflecting the soft light from inside. And for a moment, he caught his own reflection, faint but visible, and something about it felt unfamiliar, not because of the disguise, but because of the way he was looking at himself, without the usual certainty, without the quiet assurance that he understood the situation completely. Clara returned with the coffee, placing it in front of him with the same steady motion, and as he reached for it, their hands nearly met, not touching, just close enough to register the presence of another person, and Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, something unspoken passing through the space between them before he wrapped his fingers around the warm cup. "Thank you," he said, the words coming out softer than expected, and Clara gave a slight nod, as if the exchange required nothing more. He took a sip, the warmth settling in slowly, and for a moment, he simply sat there, not analyzing, not calculating, just experiencing the quiet of the moment, something he had not allowed himself to do in a long time. Across the room, the elderly woman gathered her things, offering Clara a gentle smile as she stood, and Clara returned it, just as gently, no more, no less, and Ethan noticed it again. That consistency, that quiet refusal to let any interaction become more or less than it needed to be. He set the cup down, his fingers resting lightly against it, and then, without fully planning it, he spoke again. "What if someone is not being honest?" The question came out slower, more deliberate, and Clara turned back toward him, her expression steady, but her eyes slightly more focused now, as if she recognized the shift beneath the words. "About what?" she asked, and Ethan held her gaze. For a moment longer than before, the weight of the question settling in his chest, not as part of the test, but as something real, something he had not anticipated needing to ask. "About who they are," he said finally, his voice low, almost even, but carrying something beneath it, something that had not been there at the beginning of the night. Clara studied him for a brief moment, not searching for answers, not trying to uncover anything, just seeing him as he was in that moment. And then she spoke, her voice calm, steady, unchanged. Then they're not giving you much to work with. And the simplicity of the answer landed heavier than anything she had said before, because it did not accuse, did not judge. It simply stated a truth that Ethan could not easily deflect. He looked down at his hands, at the cup, at the quiet space in front of him. And for the first time that night, the test he had designed felt less like something he was conducting and more like something he was inside of, something that was no longer under his control. And as that realization settled in, quiet but undeniable, Ethan understood that whatever came next would not be something he could predict, and that uncertainty, more than anything, made him stay. The coffee had cooled slightly in Ethan's hands, but he did not notice, his fingers still wrapped around the cup as if it anchored him to something steady, something real, and the quiet of the diner seemed deeper now, not empty, but settled, like everything had found its place except him. Clara moved behind the counter, wiping down a surface with slow, deliberate motions, and there was no rush in what she did. No signal that the night needed to end faster or slower. Just a continuation of what was already happening, and Ethan watched her, not with curiosity anymore, but with something heavier, something closer to awareness, because her words from moments ago had not left him. They had stayed, quiet but persistent, repeating in a way he could not ignore. Then they're not giving you much to work with, and for the first time, he was not analyzing the statement. He was feeling it, letting it settle into the space he had carefully controlled for years. He placed the cup down slowly, the soft sound against the table breaking the stillness just enough to make the moment tangible. And when Clara approached again, there was no hesitation this time, no calculated question, no test hidden beneath his tone, just a quiet decision that had already been made. "I have not been honest," he said, the words simple, unembellished, and they landed between them without force, without drama, just present, undeniable. Clara did not react immediately, not with surprise, not with judgment. She simply stood there, her eyes meeting his, steady as they had been all night, as if she had been waiting for something like this, not expecting it, but not unsettled by it either. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a moment before returning to her. And for the first time, there was no performance in his posture, no role left to play, just a man standing at the edge of something he could not step back from. "This is not who I am," he continued, his voice low, controlled, but carrying a weight that had not been there before. "I mean, it is, but not entirely." And he paused, searching for words that felt precise enough to match what he was trying to say. Something he rarely struggled with, but now found unfamiliar. "I came here pretending to be someone else," he said finally, the truth settling in the space between them like something fragile but necessary. Clara listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, not distant, not engaged in any obvious way, just present, allowing the moment to exist without shaping it. And that alone made it harder for Ethan to continue, because there was nothing to push against, nothing to react to, just a quiet openness that reflected his words back to him. "I wanted to see how people would treat me if I had nothing," he added, the explanation coming out slower, more deliberate, as if he was hearing it for the first time himself. And as the sentence ended, something in his expression shifted, not outwardly but subtly, like a realization forming just beneath the surface. Clara remained still for a moment longer, her gaze steady, and then she spoke, her voice calm, unchanged. "And what did you find?" And the question was not sharp, not probing. It did not demand an answer. It simply existed, waiting. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not as part of the test, not as a subject to observe, but as a person standing in front of him. And for a brief moment, he did not answer, not because he did not know, but because the answer was no longer simple, no longer something he could summarize in a single conclusion. He glanced around the diner, at the emptying tables, the quiet corners, the small details he had overlooked before, and then back at Clara. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all night. "I found that I was asking the wrong question," and the words hung there, soft but certain, carrying more weight than anything he had said before, because they were not part of the test. They were the end of it, whether he had planned it or not. Clara did not respond right away, not because the moment required silence, but because she did not rush to fill it. And that alone made Ethan's words feel heavier, more real, as if they had finally reached a place where they could exist without being shaped or redirected. She stood there for a second longer, her gaze steady, and then she gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in approval, just an acknowledgement, as if what he had said was enough on its own. "Most people do," she said quietly, and there was no judgment in her tone, no sense of correction, just a simple observation that did not try to change what had already been realized. Ethan let out a slow breath, something in his shoulders easing without him fully noticing. And for a moment, he looked down at the table, at the cup, at the small details that had surrounded him all night, but now felt different. Not because they had changed, but because he had. "I thought if I removed everything," he said after a pause, his voice softer now, more reflective, "the truth would be clearer." And he shook his head slightly, almost to himself. "But I was only removing the wrong things." And the words settled into the quiet space between them, not as a conclusion, but as something still unfolding. Clara listened, her expression unchanged, but there was a subtle warmth in the stillness now, not something she showed openly, but something that existed in the way she remained present, in the way she did not interrupt or redirect, just allowed him to arrive at his own understanding. "People do not become honest when you take things away," she said after a moment, her voice calm, steady. "They just become what they already are," and the simplicity of it landed deeper than anything else, because it did not contradict him. It completed the thought in a way he had not considered. Ethan nodded slowly, the movement small but certain, and for the first time that night, there was no resistance left in him, no need to question or test what he was hearing, just a quiet acceptance that something fundamental had shifted. He reached into his coat, not for effect, not as part of any plan, but because the moment required it, and when he placed his wallet on the table, the action felt almost secondary, like a detail that no longer carried the weight it once did. "My name is Ethan Caldwell," he said, not with emphasis, not expecting a reaction, just stating it plainly. And Clara looked at him the same way she had all night, her expression steady, her posture unchanged, as if the name did not alter what she had already seen. "Clara," she replied, as if introducing herself again, or perhaps for the first time in a way that matched the moment. And there was something in that simplicity that made Ethan pause, because it meant the conversation had never been about names or titles. Not really. The diner was nearly empty now, the last few customers gathering their things, the quiet settling in fully, and Ethan stood slowly, not in a rush, not with the urgency he was used to, just moving when it felt right. He left cash on the table, more than enough, but he did not look to see how she would react, did not wait for acknowledgement, because for the first time, it did not feel like something that needed to be noticed. He stepped toward the door, the bell above it faint as he pushed it open, and the cool air outside met him without resistance. The street calm, the rain gone, leaving only the soft reflection of light on the pavement. He paused for a moment just outside, glancing back through the window,